Have a day today, dog. Offense, great drive.
Go!
He's up. 1, 2, 3.
Welcome to Training Camp Live, presented by Atlantic Health System.
Welcome to Training Camp Live, presented by Atlantic Health. Another beautiful day here in Florham Park, the second to last practice before the Atlanta Falcons come to town. 2 joint practices here at One Jets Drive. The game next Monday night. I'm Ethan Greenberg, Eric Allen, joined shortly by Caroline Hendershot on the field. It's a beautiful day, like I said. A lot of news, though, has happened since we've last been live. So let's just dive right into it. The biggest news, of course, comes at the quarterback position with Zach Wilson. But the new chapter in this injury story comes today because Zach Wilson is set to undergo surgery in L.A., and the Jets won't know the full extent of the injury until some point after the surgery. Is that right?
Yeah, the Jets practice out here Tuesday morning in Florham Park, but I think all of Jets Nation right now is thinking about what's happening in Southern California. He's going to undergo arthroscopic surgery. The hope is that this is a 2 to 4 week injury, bone bruise, meniscus tear, just a minor surgery, and then he'll be out here in a matter of weeks. But, Greens, we do have to caution everybody that you won't fully know his prognosis until you actually go in when he is under the knife. So I think everybody who roots for this team right now and who works for this team has their fingers crossed to see what happens here today in Southern California.
Right, I think it's a great point and one that we need to reiterate because there's a sense right now that the Jets have dodged a bullet, but also there's could be bad news coming out of today's surgery, just as much of a chance as there could be good news later today. So that's just something to keep an eye on. And let's just go back to Friday night for a minute because I think it's part of the story here. Zach Wilson throws the interception on his first drive. He goes out for a second one. Then when the injury takes place, he tried to make a move on an Eagles defender as opposed to just going out of bounds, which is definitely probably a teaching lesson for him, right?
Yeah, but hindsight is 20/20.
The competitive nature is you want to get as many yards as you can, especially after throwing a pick.
I'm sitting there in the press box. I did not think anything of the move because that is part of his game. Yes, it's easy to go back and say it's a preseason game, go out of bounds. He faced instantaneous pressure off the snap. That was Max Mitchell starting at right tackle for the Jets. And then at left tackle, of course, Chuma Edoga. And ironically, underneath us right now, the camera is out looking at these guys go through, I believe, special teams drills at the beginning of practice. But Dwayne Brown is underneath us here on our platform, and he's getting ready. We'll have to see when he's ready to participate in team activities. But going back to that play, Greens, I think Zach Wilson is an athlete. He's just making a play. He thinks he can get upfield, and he wasn't going to take a hit. And 9 times out of 10, or 99 times out of 100, the knee doesn't buckle. Unfortunately, on this play, it buckled.
And unfortunately, it is the same knee of the PCL sprain last season that caused Zach Wilson to miss a significant amount of time. And, you know, there's a ripple effect that starts with Joe Flacco. And we're going to talk about Joe Flacco in a minute here, but let's actually hear from Caroline for more on the transition from Zach Wilson to Joe Flacco. Caroline, good morning.
Good morning, EA. Good morning, Ethan. You know, I talked to Braxton Berrios after practice 2 days ago, and he said so far the transition from Zach Wilson to Joe Flacco has been seamless. He said the best thing about Joe Flacco is that he's been in the league for so many years, going on 15 this year. He's been in so many different schemes that he's used to this. He's used to stepping up to the plate when it needs to happen. He's got great command of the huddle, and so they're excited to have him at the helm. They said there's really no difference from what they were experiencing with Zach to now the transition with Joe. So I think everything should be good for them. Even wide receiver Garrett Wilson said yesterday, Joe Flacco's balls are wide receiver friendly, so it's all good for all of them.
Awesome, Caroline. Great stuff. Joe Flacco right now operating with the first team until we understand the extent of Zach Wilson's injury. And with Joe Flacco, EA, Robert Saleh talked about it. He's Joe Cool. He thinks that he can be a starting quarterback in the NFL still. And Joe Flacco yesterday talking to the media, really funny about it, right? He's like, yeah, you know, I'm like the old dad that everyone picks on in the room, but he seems to be taking it well, and we've seen it throughout training camp. He's still got it, and the transition really has seemed seamless between Zach Wilson to Joe?
Well, he's a wily veteran. He's 37 years old. This is a former Super Bowl MVP. This is a guy who's thrown for more than 40,000 yards, more than 41,000 yards in his NFL career. He got the moniker Joe Cool for a reason. And this is why you have a guy like Flacco here. He knows this offense. He's worked with quarterbacks coach Rob Calabrese for a few years because you go back to their days together in Denver. And think about what happened when Wilson went down last year. You mentioned it before. We saw Mike White come on, have that great game against the Cincinnati Bengals. And White led that first drive down the field against the Colts before he went out. And then Josh Johnson came in. He operated very well behind the controls, behind the offensive line, and then finally gave way to Flacco. And I thought Flacco was especially good against the Miami Dolphins last year. One thing Joe Flacco is going to be able to do until he's dead is he can throw the football. He can throw the football, and you're not going to be able to fool him with anything you throw at him defensively. So it's great to have that presence, that veteran presence, and the Jets have a lot of confidence. And not only Flacco, but Mike White, and how about Chris Streveler as well?
Yeah, Chris Streveler, the gamer. What Chris Streveler did at Philadelphia last Friday was amazing. The fact that he had not taken a single team rep in practice, got more playing time than he probably thought he was going to, and he stepped right up to the plate. He knocked it out of the park, and he led the Jets to an 11-point comeback.
It's a great story.
Yeah,
it's a great story.
It's what the preseason is really all about.
And that's what Robert Saleh said. It's a teaching point, you know. There's a guy who did not have one team rep prior to going into that game late in the third quarter against the Eagles. And I'm going to give him the nickname of the Snake because he takes off, he's slippery, and he just makes things happen. 2 touchdown passes, including the game winner to Calvin Jackson late.
The Snake, Chris, the Snake Streveler.
Yeah, you like that?
I do like that. Not as good as Jamie and Sherwood's The Florham Park Strangler, but it's still good.
We got a snake and a strangler.
All right, so with Joe Flacco, though, before we move on here, I do want to say this. You mentioned the Dolphins game, 290 yards. He had that 62-yard touchdown to Elijah Moore that really started Elijah Moore breaking out in the second half of the season. Of course, he led the Jets in receiving yards as a rookie. But the thing with Flacco, being in this system now for a second year, the chemistry that he's developed through the receivers, we've seen it throughout training camp. Even though the first-team offense might be up, the receivers, whether you're the starters, whether you're the reserves, there's so much mixing and matching that all the receivers get work with all the quarterbacks in practice. So really the transition from a chemistry standpoint, from a receiver standpoint specifically, should be pretty quick.
Well, Caroline just articulated it right there. Garrett Wilson, the number 10 overall pick out of Ohio State, talked about him throwing such a catchable pass. Flacco walks into a situation here in 2022, a better situation, because there's just so many more weapons here in year 2 under Robert Saleh than were here in year 1. We think about the wide receiver position and the addition of a guy like aforementioned Garrett Wilson. The tight end position, Tyler Conklin continues to impress here at camp. You got C.J. Uzomah, Jeremy Ruckert. Nice to see him get on the board the other night against the Philadelphia Eagles. So he's gradually increasing his teamwork. And how about the running backs out of the backfield? So Joe Flacco just walks into a situation with more playmakers around him. I know we're going to get to this later, but the one place where this team really needs continuity is up front along that offensive line.
Yeah, it really is. We are going to talk about it. Joe Flacco, I just want to say there is a chance that he'll start against the team that drafted him in the Baltimore Ravens on September 11th, which is when the Jets regular season kicks off Sunday, September 11th at MetLife Stadium. You can be there for the 2022 home opener when the green and white take on the Ravens at 1 p.m. Secure your seats now at nmyjets.com/tickets. Savings are available for groups of 10 or more. So I do, before we talk about the O-line.
I can't wait for MetLife, September 11th. I can't wait. That place is going to be.
It's going to be jumping.
Yeah.
It's going to be
electric.
A very exciting atmosphere, for sure, especially when you think about all the moves that the Jets have made throughout the course of the offseason. It all culminates starting September 11th. Obviously, like we said earlier, if you're just joining us, we'll see what the status is, the extent of Zach Wilson's injury, set to be determined later today. He's in Los Angeles undergoing knee surgery. Right now, the belief is that the Jets dodged a bullet. that could be confirmed.
That's
or
the
that-
hope.
Yeah,
That's the hope.
It
Yeah.
could be confirmed later today. It also
You
could
just
be
never know.
denied.
The MRI can only reveal so much.
And Mekhi Becton is a great example of that. Robert Saleh thought that the Jets were in the clear. Turns out that's not the case.
Well,
But-
that's why Robert Saleh addressed things a little bit differently Friday night, because
Right.
he didn't want to get ahead of himself. Because, listen, you do what you can, and you take a look at the early prognosis, and you get only so much. And for the Jets, they're going to get clarity after what happens today.
Let's talk about the Jets' defensive line, the deepest position on the team. We've talked about it a long time. A lot of people, including Carl Lawson, thought that Lawson would make his return to game action Friday night at Philadelphia. Robert Saleh says, you know what, that's not the case. He pulls Lawson and C.J. Mosley out of the lineup real quick, right before kickoff. So for Carl Lawson, expected to be for sure, as Robert Saleh put it, playing Monday night at MetLife Stadium against the Falcons. But the Jets' defensive line, you really saw them get after it. They accounted for 4 of the team's 5 sacks Friday, the 1 sack that came on the Quincy Williams late hit on Jalen Hurts. But how about Jermaine Johnson? Because I don't think he technically had a sack, but he seemed like he really was flying around at the length.
Listen, that was a hell of a play. We lose focus of that because of what happened with Quincy Williams going late, going up high against Jalen Hurts. But that was a 3rd and 5 play from about the 32 or about the 33-yard line, I think. 3rd and 5, and Jalen Hurts is as elusive as all heck. He can run the football. He got out, and Jermaine Johnson stayed with them step for step, forced them out of bounds before, unfortunately, you have the teaching moment with Quincy Williams. You got to know where you are on the field. Again, he's not a cheap shot artist. Robert Saleh addressed that yesterday, and I'm sure he's going to be making better decisions in the future. But Jermaine Johnson has really come on in camp. He's been a handful for all these offensive linemen to handle. He's so violent and so powerful, and he's got a big-time ceiling.
Look, I just want to say this about the D-line. Tanzel Smart was a guy that really flashed at practice before he had 2 sacks against the Eagles. And then Michael Clemens as well. I mean, I know we talk about the top rookies on this team. You have to with 3 first-round picks and then Bryce Hall, the first running back selected. But Michael Clemens has really, really impressed the past couple weeks.
I'm glad you mentioned Tanzel Smart. 2 sacks. What an effort. He had another strong practice again yesterday. It's going to be a tough cut-down day for the Jets because they have so many NFL players up front along that defensive line. And you mentioned Michael Clemens. He's been given the nickname Debo out here at One Jets Drive. For folks who remember the movie Friday, that's one of the classics out there. But I'll tell you, Clemens, not a bad debut if you're talking about 1 sack, and I believe he had 7 quarterback pressures.
Yeah, Michael Clemens was very impressive against the Eagles, and that's somebody that I want to see how he does against the Atlanta Falcons. And he's clearly passed the test against the Eagles. Let's see what he can do as training camp enters the joint practice stage. But talk about guys that show up. Bryce Hall is somebody who's continued to show up day after day. And the plan originally throughout training camp was to have Bryce Hall and Sauce Gardner alternate on the outside with DJ Reed cemented as a starting corner spot. DJ Reed got hurt, hamstring injury, started to work back in a little yesterday in individual drills, no team periods. But Bryce Hall, day after day, seizes the opportunity and continues to make plays.
Hamstrings are a little tricky, so you want to take every caution you can there, because if you force a guy back too early, you can really have a long-term injury. With that being said, you mentioned before DJ Reed, he's expected back in team activities this week. In fact, he could be back out there today. You are coming Sunday, 3 weeks away from the regular season opener. So once DJ Reed, in fact, gets back in the lineup and is taking those starting reps on the outside, I wonder how quickly the Jets will make a decision at that number 1 cornerback spot across from him with the aforementioned Sauce Gardner and Bryce Hall. Bryce Hall has had quietly a great camp.
I definitely agree with that. And Brandon Echols, the guy that started for the Jets last year, other or outside.
Man, Garrett Wilson just made a one-handed catch in the end zone. I don't think our camera caught that.
It was sick.
But that was pretty. Left-hander, too.
Individual drills.
Yeah.
Garrett Wilson reaching across his body, stuck it one-handed. I just want to say this about the corners. Brandon Eccles continues to work to the side today at Jets practice. And another guy, just before we move on, Luck Barku, San Diego State. He's flashed at times. Javelin Guidry is also somebody that's had a quietly good camp. But you brought up
good position depth, right?
Yeah, it is.
Because another
it's
group
totally changed. Completely changed since last season.
And it's been a tough deal with the injuries with Becton and Wilson. But what's clear about this roster is that it just has so much more depth than it did at this point last year.
You brought up the offensive line. Dwayne Brown's working to the side as he works into team periods with the New York Jets. But it's probably the storyline to watch after Zach Wilson, because there's been so much shuffling up front, and you know that Joe Douglas wants to dominate in the trenches, specifically on the offensive line. Originally, you're thinking George Fant on the left side, Mekhi Becton on the right side. Fant working into team periods in the beginning of camp. Mekhi Becton now out for the season, although he has not been officially placed on injured reserve yet. The Jets signed Dwayne Brown. He moves to the left side. George Fant moves to the right side. There's so much shuffling right now that the biggest thing for this group right now is for the 5 starters to get as much chemistry as they can in the 3 weeks that are remaining between now and the regular season.
They need it because they really didn't have it in the spring either, because Becton, a new father here, he was working out on his own in Texas and then came back, and he worked so diligently after mandatory minicamp in order to get ready before suffering that knee injury. Tough break for him. And his teammates feel really bad because Becton put in the work. Everybody here has talked about that, even post-injury. And then Fant, you're talking about a guy who came off-season surgery himself, so he was limited. So you get to the start of camp, you're right, you're thinking you're set. You got George Fant off a career year at left tackle, and then you're going to shift Mekhi Becton over to right tackle. So right now, where you're at here in team practices, it can't happen soon enough where you get Dwayne Brown out there playing left tackle next to Lincoln Tomlinson. You got the 2 veterans, obviously Connor McGovern there at the pivot at the center position. Then your right guard, Elijah Vera Tucker, who has elite potential in the National Football League. And then finally, George Fant, who thought he had found a home at left tackle. He's going to have to shift back to right tackle, where he started last year at Carolina.
I want to bring up George Fant, and I want to continue on this for a minute because you make a great point. George Fant, it's the irony in this is that George Fant tears his ACL in Seattle. He was supposed to start at left tackle. The guy the Jets just signed, Dwayne Brown, gets traded from the Houston Texans to the Seattle Seahawks to play left tackle. George Fant ends up playing a reserve role in Seattle. The Jets sign him to a multi-year deal as a free agent. He starts year 1 at right tackle. Then, because of injury to Mekhi Becton last year, shifts to the left side. Career year in the system that he thinks fits him best throughout his career in Mike LaFleur's scheme. Then he's set at the left side, and the guy that replaces him because of injury to Mekhi Becton is the guy that the Seattle Seahawks traded for when George Fant got hurt originally way back when, and that's Dwayne Brown. And I just want to say this about George Fant. It's twofold. One, it just shows to who George Fant is as a professional, going back and forth between both sides, as someone who spent most of his career before here as a reserve. The second point here is that this is George Fant's first year at right tackle in Mike LaFleur's system. So what are expectations for him now, knowing that he fits the scheme well and that he's on the other side of what he calls home?
Well, Salah said his blessing is his curse because he's so versatile, because he came from Seattle where he played left tackle, right tackle, even lined up as a third tight end. This guy was a standout.
He's caught a pass from Russell Wilson before.
Yes, standout college basketball player. With that being said, Salah made a very good point in terms of him moving over to right tackle. A lot of people point to his production, how he had his best numbers last year at the left tackle position. Yes, he's played right tackle before, but he's not played right tackle before in the system, sans a couple plays against the Carolina Panthers in regular season action. So we'll definitely get more of a full look at George tackle, the right tackle position in the Jets' wide zone blocking system.
Right, and the fact of the matter is George Fant was a good left or a good right tackle in 2020. He should be a better right tackle in this system. So it'll be interesting to see how this offensive line shapes up over the course of the next week or so. Hopefully the Jets will be able to have a full front five, fully healthy against the Atlanta Falcons in joint practices. And quickly before we wrap up here, definitely a different intensity level against joint practices. We saw that against the Eagles last year here in Florham Park. So what do you expect from the Jets? What do you want to see from the Jets when the Falcons come to town, excluding the game?
Robert Saleh said yesterday he wants a group of agitators. What we've seen out here on the field of late is that the Jets are kind of getting under their own skin. It's the point of camp where you're sick of seeing your brother every day. I think the Jets are ready to see more of another uniform. We saw that last week against the Philadelphia Eagles. We're going to see that Friday and Saturday here this week in spirited sessions against the Atlanta Falcons. What I want to see, actually, I want to see the Jets dominate on the practice field, especially inside the trenches. Because I look at the Atlanta Falcons and say, yes, they have some talented football players, but that's a roster that is in complete rebuild mode from my perspective right now. And I really want to see the Jets take care of business in the trenches on the practice field, even before we get to Monday night.
And we'll see if Drake London's going to be healthy. He got hurt, so there might not be a Sauce Gardner-Drake London one-on-one matchup. But listen, we're live both Friday and Saturday right here in Florham Park. We will see you then.